A $5 alarm clock is the whole reason a nice bank lost $10 million. Not a drill, not dynamite, a cheap clock. Albert Spaggiari, a local photographer, rented a box in the Société Générale vault, the one Europe's best engineers swore was unbreakable. He locked that clock inside, set to ring at midnight, just to see if the vault could hear. It rang all night. Nobody came. The bank had been too smug to spend $5 on an alarm, and the people who lost the most could barely go to the police. Those boxes were full of undeclared cash, gold, and things nobody wanted the taxman to see. A year before that clock rang, Albert was photographing weddings, first communions, the odd passport photo in a little portrait studio in Nice. 43 years old, polite, forgettable. Exactly the kind of man you would trust with your daughter's christening pictures. But Albert had a second life behind the camera. He had fought as a paratrooper in Indochina. He had done a short stretch in his youth for a small armed robbery, and he had spent more than a year seeing at one building, working out how to open it. That building was the Société Générale. The bank told everyone the vault could not be robbed, and for years that reputation did the work for it. The largest private vault in southern France. Around 4,000 safe deposit boxes, reinforced concrete walls, a time lock that sealed the door on Friday evening and would not open again until Tuesday morning. The bank was proud of that vault, proud enough to get lazy. Nobody had ever tried, so why would you? You cannot tunnel through a myth, except Albert had already found the crack. The concrete was never the weak spot. The silence was. All that reinforced wall. And the bank had never put a sound alarm inside the vault. That is what the clock had really tested. It rang into an empty vault all night, and not one guard so much as looked up, so Albert knew. Whatever he did down there, however loud, nobody upstairs would hear a sound. That cheap little clock told him everything he needed to know. The fortress was deaf. So how do you get into a vault nobody can open? You do not go through the door. You come up through the floor. Albert got hold of old sewer maps of Nice, some of those tunnels dating back to Napoleon's day. He crawled them alone at night, mapping the dark by hand, until he found a storm drain not far from the vault. Some accounts say about 8 meters of solid ground stood between that drain and the vault floor. 8 meters of dirt and concrete. That was the whole job. He could not dig it alone. So Albert went to Marseille and hired muscle from the local underworld. Around 20 men. The papers would later call them the sewer gang, which is generous, because for 2 months these men dug like moles. Night shifts, waist deep in filth. The smell alone would have sent most people back up the ladder, and they breathed it for weeks. It was slow, dangerous work, and any night of it could have ended with a cave-in or a passing patrol. They hauled the rubble out by the handful to keep the digging quiet, and they kept going anyway. Albert had timed the finish for one very specific weekend. By the summer of 1976, the tunnel was ready. Albert had picked a long Bastille Day holiday when the bank locked that time-controlled door on Friday evening and would not touch it again until Tuesday. 3 full days. Nobody watching, nobody listening. The crew came up through the vault floor with jacks and torches, and the first thing they did once it's inside, they welded the vault door shut. From the inside. I mean, think about the nerve of that. They were in no hurry to leave. They had come to move in for the weekend. And they did. They set up a camping stove and a folding table. They ate foie gras and drank good wine in the middle of the robbery. They laid out air mattresses for naps between shifts. And then, box by box, they went to work with a hydraulic press Albert had built himself, a tool that popped open each steel door in about 6 minutes. They worked in relays, some cracking boxes while others slept, an assembly line humming under a sleeping city. Investigators later counted 371 boxes torn open. The crew took the cash, the gold, the diamonds. They left the paperwork and the love letters scattered across the floor, because you cannot spend a love letter. Then the sewer nearly finished them. A summer storm rolled in, and the drain they had crawled through started to fill. The water was rising, fast. If that tunnel flooded, they were trapped inside a welded room with all the gold in France and no way out. So they grabbed what they could carry and left the rest behind. On the way out, they left one thing on purpose, a sentence painted on the wall, without hatred, without violence, without weapons. Every letter in a different hand, so no handwriting could ever be matched. Vain to the last brushstroke, if you ask me. Tuesday morning, the manager put his key in the vault door and nothing happened. The door would not move. It took police hours to cut their way in, expecting a hostage or a bomb. What they got instead was a cold picnic, dirty dishes, air mattresses, and a hole in the floor dropping down into the sewer. The heist of the century, the French press called it, and they had no idea yet how much was gone. How much did they take? Nobody knows for sure, and that is the part the bank hated most. By the bank's estimate, around $10 million, somewhere near 50 million francs at the time. But the bank had kept no register of what sat in those boxes, so the real figure could be double that, and no one would ever prove it. Plenty of the biggest losers never came forward at all. And if you were wondering how nobody reported half of it, you cannot report a box the taxman never knew you had. Undeclared cash. Gold that, by some accounts, had been smuggled out of Algeria years earlier. Diamonds. And reportedly, a few photographs that could end a marriage or a career. I almost feel bad for them. Almost. Only a handful of gold bars were ever recovered. If you are enjoying this one, hit subscribe. I dig up a new one of these every week.
Follow this route.
So the crew scattered, rich and invisible, and for a few months the perfect crime held. What cracked it was not a detective or forensics or the sentence on the wall. For weeks the police had almost nothing. No fingerprints, because the crew had worn gloves. No handwriting to trace. No witnesses, because everyone who mattered had been underground. Investigators crawled the same sewers Albert had mapped, working backward and finding nothing. And Albert, back in his little studio, kept photographing weddings and said not a word. For a while, the whole country half admired them. Nobody had been hurt. Only rich people with secrets, and the robbers had even left a slogan on the wall. The police did not find it charming. What finally cracked it was a jilted girlfriend. Reportedly, an ex-girlfriend of one of the crew walked into a Marseille police station in the autumn of 1976 and gave them a name. One name was all it took. That man gave up another, and the whole gang came apart, one arrest at a time, pulled in across the south of France. The police worked their way up the chain until they reached the top of it. Albert Spaggiari was picked up at Nice Airport that November and held all through the winter. The mastermind finally in a cell, with his crew lined up beside him. That should have been the end of it. It wasn't. In March of 1977, Albert sat in a judge's office in Nice, calmly going over maps of the job. He asked to reach into his coat for something. Then he jumped. Straight out a first-floor window, onto a parked car, onto a waiting motorbike, and gone. He even reportedly mailed a check later to pay for the dent his jump left in the getaway car's roof. Classic Albert. What he did not do was wait for his crew. Albert would spend the next 12 years learning what that jump really cost him. Those 20 men were already in the net, facing years for the robbery. Albert had designed and led. He found the tunnel. He hired the diggers. He built the press. He painted the wall. And when it all fell apart, he was the one who went out a window. They had trusted the plan of a man who, the moment it counted, trusted only himself. His crew served the years. Albert served none of them. Albert got away. On paper, he won. Let me tell you what winning really bought him. 12 years on the run. False names, false papers, always moving. Argentina, Buenos Aires, Madrid. A French court tried him without him and handed down a life sentence he would never serve. Because he was never coming back to serve it. He never returned a single franc. He reportedly wrote books under a false name and played the legend from the shadows. Glamorous, until you remember he could never go home to nice. He could never be Albert Spaggiari again, out loud in his own town, which was the only thing his whole ego had ever been built on. The more famous his heist got, the further he had to hide from it. He called it freedom. It was a cage with no bars, and he had built it himself. He died in 1989 of cancer at 56. By some accounts, his own mother found his body, brought back to her village, so he could come home one last time, the only way he ever could. That was the prize. A slow illness, a borrowed name, and a grave far from the one place he ever wanted to be admired. So two things stand at the end of this. A bank too cheap to spend $5 on an alarm, and it lost $10 million and change to a photographer with a sewer map. And a man so pleased with one clever idea that he spent it buying himself a slower, lonelier prison than the one he had welded himself into. The bank swore its vault could not be robbed, and it never really lived that down. And it all came back to a $5 clock, ringing all night into a vault too proud to listen. More stories like this on the channel.